Hello, welcome everyone to another monthly check-in around this. So this is my year of Brian Eno, a cultural journey inspired by this diary. So this diary he kept in 1995. It was published in 1996 and then it's been re-released in 2021. If you want to know a little more, I suggest you watch the very first episode of this series. We're now up to the October instalment. And it's been interesting for me going through, and obviously he mentions a lot about the particular music projects he's involved with. So Spinner, the Passengers album, which was one with U2, David Bowie's Outside, and the War Child charity album, and various sessions with James. So yeah, in October, and he has been mentioning it on and off, but October he mentions an awful lot about this piece of software. It's Koan Pro. So I'll look at it in a moment. In fact, we'll look at it now. So here's the entry for Wikipedia. I'll include a link to this. It gives you a bit of background around the software. It's a way of producing generative music. And so I would get the impression that it lends itself well to the sort of ambient music that Brian Eno was creating around that time, in addition to his other projects which weren't necessarily ambient. So there's some quite nice links there down the bottom in the article. In terms of other things he mentions in October of 1995, obviously, as I think I've said before, there's a lot of information jammed in, each month. Sometimes I lose track of sort of his movements, because sometimes he'll mention being somewhere and there's not necessarily a mention clearly of him travelling necessarily. So I sort of lose track of geographically where he is, although he's based in London. Sometimes I notice that happens and I have to retrace my steps and work out the course of events. And there's a case in point this month where it mentions at the start of the month that he's in Innsbruck with his family. So I thought I'd include a link from Wikipedia. It's in Austria. It's not somewhere that I've heard it mentioned, but it's not somewhere in Europe that I'm familiar with at all. So it's always interesting actually when he mentions a lot of European cities and regions that he's visiting, both on holiday and in like a musical capacity, or various other projects he's involved with. It's always interesting to sort of follow that up, I find, and go through and read a little bit about the region or the city or whatever it mentions in the diary. So I'll include a link to this if you're interested in this particular place in Austria. Broad valley between high mountains. It looks very nice actually. He also mentioned, he mentions a lot of musicians, but one name that does come up is Robert Wyatt. And Robert Wyatt's definitely a artist who I keep meaning to check out. He was originally in Soft Machine. So key, as it says here in the Wikipedia article, key player during the formative years of British jazz fusion, psychedelia and progressive rock. Now he had a life-changing accident in which, this is 1973, he fell from a 4-story window and broke his spine. And I probably became aware of him a lot later than that through a song, I think, which was called Shipbuilding. So that would have been around the time of the Falklands War, I think. I don't know if it's going to mention it specifically here. Oh, yeah, Shipbuilding. So it's actually an Elvis Costello song. And I became sort of interested because he's got these really interesting, almost like spoken word vocals. But yeah, I definitely need to check out his work. I wonder how many albums he has here. So when would that have been? 85. I'm just trying to think when he would record that. Maybe it was recorded as a single. Let's have a look. Singles. Shipbuilding. Sorry, 82, yeah. 82. I wonder. See, now I'm really curious. Was that ever... Normally it tells you in the Wikipedia articles if it's associated with anything, but it doesn't really mention it here. Let's have a look. What's that? Standalone? Yeah, it looks like it was just a standalone single, maybe. Also, it looks like he did write it for... He specifically wrote it for Robert Wyatt, yeah. Yeah, so definitely an artist I need to check out. But yeah, he's mentioned about the possibility of working with Robert Wyatt. He's considering. So it's interesting whether that comes to fruition in the last couple of months. So yeah, we're near the end now. I can't believe I've been working through this a year now, like literally a day at a time, reading each day coinciding with the corresponding day this year. Another thing that gets mentioned is MIDI guitars, and I just brought this article up because I was curious at what point was the first, I suppose, guitar synthesizer. And I remember things like this EMS Hi-Fly, which is a multi-effects. I think the sort of thing he's talking about is specifically a MIDI, like a guitar as a MIDI controller, as a way of generating MIDI, as opposed to taking a guitar and then using some sort of audio manipulation to filter, chop up, affect the attack, decay curve, if you like, of the sound. So, you know, early on, one trick to do with guitars is to feed them through the audio section of like a modular synthesizer, and that was done, I think, on the Who Are You? But what he's thinking about here is guitars that control MIDI, and there's a couple of ways that can be done. One is to have a pickup that specifically you attach to the guitar, or it's already built into the guitar, which acts as an interface and turns the signal into corresponding MIDI. Now, another way to do it is to almost do away with the conventional arrangement of a guitar. And I've seen another device that this was the case, where the actual strings that you actually pluck and the strings that you fret are two separate sets of strings. And what happens is that the system in the guitar picks up, as you strike the strings, one part of it, and then it's actually monitoring using a special fretboard where you're fretted down. So that's a slightly different way of doing it as well. But that can be used to generate MIDI as well. So yeah, here's the two main groups. Guitar synths using guitars. Guitars equipped with special sensors that actuate the synthesizer. Guitar synths using non-guitar controllers like guitar-like MIDI controllers. But I would argue there's a sort of middle ground, there's variations between the two. So, because you get some setups, like I said, where they take the signal and manipulate the signal. Then there's more this category, which the sensor produces something that actuates the synthesizer. And that in turn can produce MIDI signals. And then you have a guitar synth which has non-guitar controllers on it, and it can be used as a MIDI controller as well. So yeah, there's a sort of massive amounts of variation. My experience of using guitar synths is purely through so-called hexaphonic pickups. This is where you get a separate analog output for each string, and then that signal is then processed. So specifically the Korg Z3 setup. So the Korg Z3 was a rack mounted system, and it had a hex pickup set up with its own controller which attached to the guitar, and then this massive a cable that has multi-core cable that runs from the thing that clips to the guitar to the back of the Z3, and then the Z3 itself has sort of sound producing capabilities on it, but it can also produce MIDI as well. So the chain is a sort of hex pickup to a little controller unit that is also attached to the guitar along with the hex pickup, and then there's a cable from that then plugs into the Z3 rack, and that, as I've said, produces its own sounds or MIDI as well. So it's got 6-note polyphony on it, I think, for each of the 6 strings. It's interesting because around the time it came out, I think there was also a 6-note Akai sampler, which would have worked perfectly with it actually, because you could have one for each of the strings. Oh, there's a hex pickup there, Roland GK3. Yeah, so I'll include a link there. It's a really interesting if you're into, guitar effects and things that can be used with guitar. Oh, there we go. There's a Syntax. So this is where you've got a guitar-like MIDI controller. This is the other thing I was thinking of. So you see some strings here. There's actually some individual keys as well, and then this monitors where you are on the fretboard. And I think all of these different ways of doing it, overall what you're trying to do is improve the latency. And historically, I mean, it's better now, but historically, it was always the lower strings that there was a bit of a problem with capturing them, and there would be a tiny delay sometimes as well. So I'll include a link to that. But it was interesting to see him mentioning MIDI guitars at that point. I mean, I couldn't quite work out whether he'd only just discovered them, but they have been, I think, kicking around for a while. And certainly, like I say, the idea of a synth guitar, however that's done, obviously predates, I think, the creation of MIDI, as far as I know. Another thing he mentions in passing is a couple of albums that are currently in the charts, in addition to the War Child stuff. That's the Help album, which has recently been released in the last few months. He does mention that Spinner, which is a collaboration between him and Jar Wobble, and also Outsider are both currently in the UK charts. So that's all I really wanted to talk about in terms of the diary. Like I said, my interest was really piqued by him mentioning guitar MIDI, actually. And now what I normally do at this point in the episode is just go on and talk generally about, you know, my own rememberings from 95, helped ably by Wikipedia articles. So I was just looking through here, and of course, What's the Story Morning Glory was just released. We'll see that come up in a moment when we look at the month of October in terms of album releases. End of the O.J. Simpson murder trial, which had been running that year, and he does mention it earlier on in the diary, although not so much recently. I haven't seen it. And a whole load of other things going on, which I will include a link to as well. I decided this episode, I don't always do this, but I brought up this would be computer games, because I noticed that Hexen Beyond Heretic was out, and I remember I have these phases of playing computer games, and I don't play any for seemingly like decades, and I was on a real Hexen, or sort of Heretic, which was the original one, on a real Heretic jag around that period. And I've actually got these from either Steam or, I'm trying to think of the other one. Anyway, I got hold of them recently. It'd be a love to play those again, actually, maybe do a video. And then this, TIE Fighter. Yeah, I remember these. I remember talking about these when I was working at this point I was working at Radio Rentals, and I remember us talking about these in particular. So this is just an entry from British TV in 1995. He mentions British TV on and off during the course of the diary. And as a consequence, I thought it's quite interesting to also just look generally what was going on. So, yeah, at this point, a few of my friends had satellite TV, and in fact, several of them, it's basically people that I knew from working at Radio Rentals. And Radio Rentals was a major, what would you call it? I suppose, I don't know if reseller is the right word, but they dealt with Sky accounts. In fact, I used to deal with Sky accounts occasionally when we had clients come through to the showroom helpline by accident. We still had to deal with them anyway. And so we got to know how the infrastructure worked. And so I remember these channels being talked about by friends that had Sky accounts. I think if you were working at Radio Rentals, you got quite a good deal on the monthly subscription. I don't know if cable, I don't think at that point was quite that big, really. Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. Film-wise, and just see if there's anything I specifically remember. Don't have a lot of luck with these. I certainly wasn't going to the cinema at the time, so anything I would have watched would have been after the fact on video. I remember watching this. There was a bit of a genre rabbit hole I went down, and I'm just trying to remember what this would be included in. Would it be sci-fi noir or something like that? Yeah, I don't know. I remember picking up a book or something, and something talked about this sort of style of film. And I'm just trying to remember what the context was. Maybe it mentioned another one. I think it was another one called something like 13th Floor. Maybe. Yeah, anyway. So it's a Catherine Bigelow film. Major box office bomb. But I did watch it on VHS a little whiles after. Here we go. So just quickly look at October in terms of album releases. What's the Story? Morning Glory by Oasis. Debut Deftones album, Adrenaline, was out. Apart from that, anything else I really recognise? Oh, Scream, Dracula Scream, Rocket from the Crypt. Was that that was a Geezer Butler album, was that debut album he did? Osmosis by Ozzy Osbourne. I'm trying to remember if I have that or not. Marilyn Manson EP. I remember buying that when it came out, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Wow, Sabotage. 9th album they were on by then. I think I've mentioned I actually saw them in 2000. And they were supporting Halford and the London Astoria 2. Oh, stop, 4-2 by Anthrax. Oh yeah, I remember this coming out. And this. That was a pretty good month actually. In terms of classic albums. I mean, there's not a lot here that I specifically remember or listen to subsequently, but yeah, both Oasis and Pulp in the same month is pretty good. Oh, Tragic Kingdom by No Doubt, yeah. And then I don't know if you saw, there was this one, which was this symphonic Pink Floyd, arranged by Jazz Coleman, produced by Youth. And I was totally unaware of these. He did two, I think. He may have done more. He did one for Pink Floyd and one for Led Zeppelin. And then I'll include a link to the various British musical events that went on around that time. And I will also update the corresponding Spotify list. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.